Hey guys, welcome back to Craig's Horror House, the channel that brings you horror movie reviews, old and new. If this is your first time here, then please do not forget to hit that like and subscribe button, as it really helps us out on the channel. Today I am bringing you another old school horror classic, Creepshow. Now Creepshow came out in 1982, and it's about 5 grisly stories taken from a horror comic book, and it's good old-fashioned horror. It's directed by George A. Romero and written by Stephen King, and Stephen King even has a part of his own in this movie, but we will get onto that in just a second. Now this is another one of those horror movies that I haven't actually watched since I was a child. I only really remembered little bits and pieces like the infamous cockroach bug scene and the monster in the box. In fact, the monster in the box absolutely terrified me when I watched it as a young child. I can remember I was only really young at the time, but I literally burst into tears crying because I did not like it. And I used to watch all of these horror films back in the day with my older sister when I was probably around 9-10 years old, and I remember she would offer to turn the movie off, and even though I was crying and having an absolute meltdown, I still wanted to watch it. So the monster in the box, it definitely traumatized me as a child. So there are 5 stories in this movie, but before the stories begin, we have the introduction bit where there is this little boy being told off by his father for reading horror comic books, and he ends up being sent to his bedroom. Now, when this boy is sitting down in his bed, he ends up seeing this skeleton monster guy at his bedroom window. Now, normally this would scare a child to death, but no, not this boy. He's just there, sitting there, smiling like this skeleton person is his fairy godmother. Even the child smiling is kinda creepy. So the 5 stories are Father's Day, The Lonesome Death of Geordie Verrill, Something to Tide You Over, The Crate, and They're Creeping Up on You. Now some of these stories are better than others, but I did find, most of them entertaining. I wasn't really that bored of any of them. Now the first story, Father's Day, I thought it was a brilliant story to start with. It was cheesy, it was funny, but it was also bloody jumpy. There is this old guy who ends up getting murdered by his daughter, and every year his daughter comes back on the anniversary of his murder and visits his graveside, and there's this scene where she ends up getting drunk and reminiscing about the murder while sitting at the graveside, and then all of a sudden, this dad's mutilated hand just pops up out of the ground. And when I say that me and Peter jumped out of our skin, that is an understatement. It really caught us off guard, and I love that. I love it when things like that happen. The dead father then emerges from his grave, and his body is all rotten and mutilated, covered in bugs and maggots, and I just thought it was great. The thing that I love about these old school horror films is the fact that they don't have those crappy CGI effects. Everything just looks so much better in my opinion, and much more scarier. Don't get me wrong, some things can look a little bit fake, but it's just so much better than CGI. The dead dad then ends up getting revenge and killing other family members before dishing out his cake with a severed head as the platter. I mean, all the dad wanted was some bloody cake. I had a really good time with this story, but the next story, The Lonesome Death of Geordie Verrill, is probably my least favourite one out of the whole 5. And it's a shame because this is the story that stars Stephen King himself. Now, basically, a meteor falls out of the sky in this Geordie's backyard, and he ends up touching it on the ground when he tries to bag it up, thinking that he can make some money from it, and this ends up resulting in Geordie having this green stuff that kind of looks like furry grass growing all over his body and all over his face. The green stuff also ends up growing all over his backyard and into his house, and we end up slowly watching him turn into this green furry thing where he eventually ends up taking his own life by shooting himself in the head. This then is followed by a weather forecast of heavy rain, implying that this green furry stuff from another planet or from outer space is going to spread all around the world. Now, I don't know, I just found this one a little bit too silly for my liking. I mean, there is an element of silliness and cheesiness throughout the whole of the movie, but this one just had no scary element at all, and I just personally didn't find this story entertaining. Now, the third story I had a really good time with. This is Something to Tide You Over. Now, this story is about some crazy old guy called Richard, who I think is some sort of multi-millionaire. He decides to take revenge on his wife and the guy that she's been having an affair with called Harry. Richard ends up forcing Harry to basically bury himself into a hole on the beach, burying himself to the point where only his head is sticking out of the sand, and this is where Harry learns that the wife who he was having the affair with is also buried in some sand somewhere. Richard ends up leaving them both in the sand and waits for the sea tide to come in, where they both end up drowning, a very unpleasant death. Later on, Harry and the wife, they end up coming back from the dead to take their revenge on crazy Richard. And it's actually a really intense moment where Richard is in the house, not knowing what the fuck is going on. There's a great scene where Richard opens the door, and this is where we see Harry and the dead wife all blue and filled with water, covered in seaweed. Richard then runs into his bedroom and locks the door, and he then turns around and there is Harry and the dead wife, and it's such a great jump scare. In fact, I've actually got a little video clip of me and Peter watching this very scene the other night. Here it is. So yeah, we had a really good time with this one, but now on to the fourth story, and that is called The Crate, and this is the one that traumatized me as a child. So there is this crate in the basement, and nobody knows where it has come from, how it got there. However, this crate is completely chained up, indicating that someone does not want this crate opened. But of course, these two guys do end up opening it, and one of them ends up being pulled into the box and eaten by this monster thing that kind of looks like a demonic gorilla. Now, the effects of this monster isn't the best by today's standards, but it did scare the crap out of me back in the day as a child. But even though the effects aren't that great in this story, it's still bloody brilliant. There is a lot of intense moments in this particular story, and I think it's definitely the longest story out of the 5. When the story begins, there's actually this man called Henry who absolutely despises his wife called Billy. He hates her so much, he is constantly fantasizing about murdering her. So towards the later half of this particular story, Henry ends up luring his wife to the basement where this box is, in the hopes that the monster thing will kill her and eat her, which is what pretty much ends up happening. Henry then chains back up the box and dumps it into the sea. Now, Billy the wife is no more. There's no body. Henry pretty much gets away with offing his wife. It's so so messed up, but it's brilliant. Now, there wasn't that much cheese in this particular story. I definitely think it was probably the most scariest one out of the 5 stories, which of course I just love, but I can officially say now I am over the trauma of the monster in the box. The 5th and final story in this movie is, of course, They're Creeping Up on You. And this is the one that I always remembered because it involved bugs. There is this man called Upson, and he is basically a cruel business guy who is living in a top floor apartment, living his best life. However, he is terrified of bugs and germs and all things like that. And of course, his apartment ends up being overrun by cockroaches. So for the most part of this story, it's literally just cockroaches appearing throughout this guy's apartment and the guy freaking out and killing them. But in the climax of this story, millions, and I mean millions of cockroaches start coming out of every crack of this apartment, up the sink, up the toilet, and they literally end up surrounding this old guy and they end up covering him. Then we end up seeing the guy's dead body on the ground, but where are all the cockroaches gone? Well, all of the cockroaches start burying their way out of the dead guy, out of his mouth, out of his throat, out of his chest. It's absolutely gross. It does give you the creeps, but it's still very entertaining. It's one of those moments where you really want to look away, but you just cannot stop watching. So that is all of the 5 tales in the movie. Now, the ending of this film jumps back to that little boy from the start of the movie. You know, the little boy who was being told off by his dad for reading horror comics. Well, in the climax of this film, the little boy ends up using this voodoo doll that he got from one of his comics and ends up sticking it to his dad's, all because the dad threw away the boy's comics. I'm getting some serious serial killer in the making vibes. Honestly, I loved this movie. There were moments that were making me laugh, moments that were making me jump, moments that literally had me on the edge of the seat. I flippin' loved it. If you're looking for a really good horror movie to watch on a late Sunday night or even on Halloween with your friends, then I totally recommend this. You won't be disappointed. It's really, really creepy, it's funny, it's really entertaining. I do still think I prefer Creepshow 2 to this one, but I still enjoyed the movie. I will be watching it again. It's definitely going to be one of those films that I'm going to watch at least once a year. But now I'd like to hear some of your thoughts on Creepshow. Do we have any fans here? Which scary story was your favourite and which one was your least favourite? There are no wrong or right answers here, guys. Everyone's opinions matter on this channel, so get typing in that comments box below. Okay then, guys, well, thank you all for watching today's video. Make sure you smash that subscribe button, stay safe out there, and I will see you all again very, very soon.